On the night of May 5th to 6th, Russia launched 108 combat drones and 3 ballistic missiles at Ukrainian cities, killing at least 27 people across Zaporizhzhia, Kramatorsk, Poltava, and Dnipro. At the same time, the Kremlin was publicly demanding a 48-hour ceasefire to protect its May 9th Victory Day parade, warning that any Ukrainian disruption would trigger, quote, a massive retaliatory missile strike on the center of Kyiv. Volodymyr Zelenskyy responded by announcing his own open-ended ceasefire from midnight on May 6th, which Russia then violated 1,820 times within the first 10 hours. And for the first time in nearly 20 years, Putin's Victory Day parade will roll through Red Square without a single tank, missile launcher, or piece of heavy hardware, while Moscow and St. Petersburg have their mobile internet cut. So in this video, we're going to explain why Russia's so-called ceasefire is structurally a threat dressed in peace language, why the Kremlin is genuinely afraid of its own showcase, and what May 9th will actually reveal about the state of this war. If you love staying informed and want some of the best reporting on YouTube, then subscribe and ring the bell for more. So, let's start by establishing what's actually on offer here. For context, Russia's Ministry of Defense, acting on Putin's orders, announced a unilateral ceasefire for May 8th and 9th, framed around the 81st anniversary of the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany. The proposal apparently originated in a phone call between Putin and Donald Trump on April 29th, and it arrived in public rather than through any direct diplomatic channel to Kyiv. It also arrived bundled with that explicit threat of a missile strike on central Kyiv if the parade were disrupted, which is, we'd note, a fairly unusual structural feature for a peace overture. Zelenskyy dismissed the offer as a, quote, theatrical performance and proposed instead a longer-running silence beginning at midnight, with Ukraine acting symmetrically based on Russian conduct. Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha then declared that Russia's overnight assault had, quote, proved its calls for a May 9th truce were fake. The point we're trying to make is that this isn't really a ceasefire negotiation, it's a piece of choreography, and Ukraine's counterproposal was designed to expose that within hours rather than wait weeks for a diplomatic verdict. However, the more revealing story is what's happening inside Russia. The May 9th parade will, for the first time since roughly 2007, feature no tanks, no armored vehicles, and no missile systems, with only marching troops, military academy students, and an aviation flypast on display. The Kremlin's official rationale cites the, quote, current operational situation and a, quote, terrorist threat from Ukraine. Slovakia's Robert Fico is the only confirmed foreign leader expected to attend, alongside Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, a remarkable contraction from the 2025 parade, which hosted Xi Jinping and Lula. Mobile internet and SMS have been throttled across both Moscow and St. Petersburg, disrupting cashless payments, ATMs, taxis, and messaging apps for ordinary Russians, while airports in 15 cities were closed on May 5th. Russian military bloggers have apparently admitted the scale-down is primarily about drone fear, not equipment shortages, and the evidence is fairly direct. On May 4th, a Ukrainian drone struck an upscale residential tower on Mosfilmovskaya Street, roughly 6 kilometers from the Kremlin, and on May 5th, Ukraine hit an electronics plant in Cheboksary, more than 1,500 kilometers from the border. SA-400 and Pantsir S-1 air defense batteries have reportedly been pulled from across Russia toward Moscow to build additional protective rings, which presumably leaves frontline regions thinner. To be clear, we wouldn't take Russian state polling at face value, but Levada-adjacent figures put Putin's approval at 65.6%, the lowest level since the February 2022 invasion. Anyway, this brings us nicely onto what Ukraine actually wants from this moment. Briefings from Kyiv apparently split between two strategies: hitting the parade directly to puncture the mythology, or exploiting the Moscow air defense concentration to strike high-value energy infrastructure elsewhere. The latter has been the established pattern for weeks, with Ukraine conducting at least 21 strikes on Russian refineries and pipelines in April alone. The Tuapse refinery, one of Russia's top 10 and the only major Black Sea coast facility, was struck 4 times between April 16th and May 1st, with damage exceeding $300 million and a 7-square-kilometer oil spill, contaminating roughly 60 kilometers of coastline. As we've covered on this channel before, Ukrainian deep strikes have now reduced Russian oil processing volumes to their lowest level since 2009. Meanwhile, the diplomatic track has effectively stalled. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner have apparently deprioritized the Ukraine file in favor of the Middle East, with Witkoff yet to visit Kyiv at all, reportedly because he doesn't want to take the train. Russia's actual demands remain essentially identical to February 2022, namely Ukrainian army reductions, no security guarantees, and territorial concessions, which is why analysts are now describing the Russian position as, quote, pause to rearm rather than peace. So, what does May 9th actually reveal regardless of what happens on the day? Well, if Ukraine strikes the parade, Putin's Victory Day mythology takes a direct symbolic hit on live television. If Ukraine doesn't strike, the absence of tanks and missiles tells the story by itself, because the parade has already been visibly hollowed out by the very weapons Russia is deploying against Ukrainian civilians. Either way, fundamentally, Moscow has lost control of its own narrative. The country launching 108 drones at apartment blocks is the same country cutting the internet to its own capital to defend a celebration of the defeat of fascism, and ultimately, whether Putin's mythology survives May 9th or visibly cracks, the parade itself is now the clearest single picture of where this war actually stands, at least for now.